The year was 1865, and the frontier lay raw and untamed, a land of brutal opportunity where dreams often bled into dust. The air reeked of gun oil, horse sweat, and the acrid smoke of campfires that never seemed to die. In this world, mercy was scarce, and a man's worth was weighed not by his words but by the iron on his hip and the grit in his eyes. For Caleb Ward, a veteran of the war and a man worn by loss, the frontier promised a chance to start again. But promises were thin as paper, and fate was quick to tear them apart. Caleb rode with Eliza Harper, the woman he loved, the one bright spark that had carried him through the shadow of battlefields. She was no delicate flower of eastern cities, but a survivor, sharp-eyed and steady-handed, her spirit hardened by the cruelty of men who once sought to break her. Their union was meant to be sealed before God and the town alike, a quiet wedding in the small settlement of Red Rock. Yet, even before the vows, the world whispered against them. Rumors swirled like dust in the wind. Eliza was an outsider, a woman whose past was as contested as the land they sought to claim. Some called her cursed, others called her tainted, and though Caleb stood by her, the whispers carried weight. They reached the trading post on the outskirts, a squat building of timber and mud brick, its walls scarred with old bullet holes that told their own stories. Inside, the air hung heavy with tobacco smoke and the sharp scent of whiskey. Men leaned on the counter, voices low, their gazes shifting as Caleb entered with Eliza at his side. The scrape of chairs against the floor was not welcoming, but wary, as if two strangers had brought a storm through the door. Caleb kept his shoulders squared, the brim of his hat low, his hand brushing the worn grip of the Colt at his hip. Eliza felt the weight of every stare, but did not flinch. She carried herself with quiet dignity, though her fingers tightened slightly around Caleb's arm. The barkeep, a grizzled man with a crooked nose, muttered something beneath his breath. Another man at the table let out a sharp laugh, though no jest had been spoken. Caleb ignored them, stepping forward to collect supplies: flour, dried beans, rifle cartridges, and the hard biscuits that lasted longer than hope. Yet, as he placed coin on the counter, the door slammed open. Cold wind swept in, carrying with it the harsh scent of gunpowder. 3 men entered, rough in dress and cruel in demeanor, their boots heavy on the planks. Bandits. Their eyes scanned the room, then locked on Caleb and Eliza. The leader, a scar splitting his cheek, smirked as though he'd found prey wandering blind. "Well now," the scarred man drawled, his hand resting on the pistol at his belt. "Looks like Red Rock's got itself some newcomers. Shame no one told you, outsiders ain't welcome here." The trading post fell into silence. Caleb's jaw tightened, his body shifting subtly, ready for the inevitable. Eliza's gaze didn't waver, though her heart thudded in her chest. The scarred man stepped closer, eyes lingering on her with a malice that curdled the air. "Pretty thing," he sneered, "but don't much look like she belongs." The words were a spark on dry tinder. Caleb's voice was low, steady, and dangerous. "She belongs with me. That's all you need know." His hand hovered near his weapon. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to freeze, every soul holding their breath. Then came the metallic click of a hammer cocked back. Too late to turn away. The first shot shattered the silence. Chaos erupted. Smoke filled the room as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass. Caleb shoved Eliza down behind a barrel, returning fire with grim precision. The crack of his Colt echoed like thunder, each shot carrying the weight of desperation. Men scrambled, shouting, the barkeep diving for cover. One of Caleb's old comrades, Jonah Pike, a wiry man who had fought beside him in Virginia, rose to defend them, only to be cut down in the crossfire, his cry swallowed by the roar of guns. The sight seared Caleb's heart, but there was no time for grief. He dragged Eliza toward the back door, firing blindly to cover their retreat. They burst into the cold air, boots pounding against the frozen ground. Horses screamed in panic as lead whizzed past. Caleb hauled Eliza into the saddle, mounting his own in a single, desperate motion. They spurred their mounts hard, fleeing into the open wilderness as Red Rock shrank behind them. Smoke rose faintly from the trading post, mingling with the crimson of dusk. Jonah's face haunted Caleb's thoughts, but his grip on Eliza tightened, the weight of her safety pressing heavier than any grief. The world had given its answer. It said no. No to their love, no to their union, no to peace. They were marked now, outlaws in the eyes of the town, blamed for the blood spilled though none of it was their choosing. The whispers would become shouts, the prejudice against Eliza hardened into fury. Doors would close, help would be denied. Yet, as the wind cut sharp against their faces, Caleb leaned close, his voice rough but certain. "They'll not tear us apart. Not while I breathe." Nights in the wilderness bit like wolves. Frost rimmed their blankets, their fire sputtered against the wind, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. Eliza shivered under the tattered coat Caleb draped across her shoulders. Her lips blue, but her spirit unbroken. "You should have left me," she murmured one night, her voice thin against the howl of the wind. "They'll hunt you because of me." Caleb's answer was steady, without hesitation. "I didn't fight through war to lay down now. You're my reason. They'll have to kill me to take that from me." The words hung in the frigid night, stronger than any oath before an altar. In the distance, coyotes howled, their cries carrying like the laughter of unseen devils. Eliza leaned against him, drawing warmth from his body, her breath slow and uneven. In that fragile silence, she whispered, "Then I'll never let go." Her fingers curled into his, binding them not with rings but with resolve forged in fire. They were two souls against a merciless land, defying the judgment of a world that would not have them. And so they rode onward, deeper into the unknown, shadows stretching long behind them. Every mile carried them further from the life they had hoped for, yet closer to the truth that love, though scorned and hunted, burned brighter than any flame the frontier could smother. Ahead lay trials, unseen, dangers unspoken, but their hands did not part. Together, they vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind a town that had chosen to condemn them, stepping into a future bound by defiance. The world had spoken its refusal, yet in their silence, in their joined hearts, another vow was already forming. The wilderness did not welcome them, it tested them. The river cut swift and merciless through the valley, swollen by spring thaw, its roar echoing like cannon fire across the cliffs. Caleb reined his horse at the bank, the water churning black and white beneath the fading light. Eliza sat astride her mount, eyes wide as she watched the furious current, the wind tangling strands of her hair across her face. "There's no crossing back," Caleb said, his voice grim, as if the river itself barred their return to any semblance of peace. "It's forward or nothing." He guided his horse into the water, the beast trembling against the pull. Eliza followed, her jaw tight with fear. The current seized them at once, dragging sideways with a force that threatened to topple horse and rider. Caleb shouted above the roar, urging his animal forward, but a sudden slip threw him into the torrent. The world spun, water filling his ears, his chest. He clawed for air, glimpsed Eliza's pale face on the bank, her scream drowned by the river's thunder. He fought with every ounce of soldier's grit, hands breaking the surface as he reached for anything solid. Then came Eliza, reckless, unyielding, leaning low from her horse, extending her arm. He grasped her wrist, his strength waning, and she dragged with fury born of love. Together they collapsed against the rocks, soaked and breathless. Caleb coughed hard, water burning his lungs. Eliza clutched him close, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I'd rather die with you than live without you," she gasped, her voice raw. His hand closed over hers, trembling but resolute. "Then we live together, no matter what comes." They pressed onward into the wilderness, every step of their journey marked by hunger, cold, and the cruel weight of solitude. The sky hung low with gray clouds, the land a patchwork of pines and barren earth. Nights were a war of endurance. Caleb scouted game, his rifle heavy in his weary arms. Rabbits were scarce, deer elusive. They chewed on what scraps they found, stomachs aching with emptiness. Yet, In every hardship, their bond deepened. Around the fire, Eliza would speak of her past, of the night raiders had come to her father's homestead, leaving only ash and silence in their wake. She spoke not to seek pity, but to lay bare the scars that made her who she was. Caleb listened, his eyes steady, never judging, never flinching. When his turn came, he spoke of battlefields soaked in blood, of comrades left in shallow graves, of the sound of cannon still rattling in his skull. Eliza reached for his hand, and for the first time in weeks he felt warmth, not just from the flames, but from her quiet strength. One night, as the storm raged overhead, lightning splitting the sky, Eliza whispered, "I fear losing you more than death itself." Caleb's reply came low and fierce, "Then you'll not lose me, not while I breathe." The storm passed, but the echoes of their vow lingered like a sacred oath, binding them more tightly than any law or scripture. Days later, as they moved through a ravine, they came upon a figure sprawled near the rocks. A native warrior, blood staining his side, his breathing shallow. Caleb's hand went instinctively to his pistol, but Eliza dismounted, kneeling beside the man. Her fingers probed the wound, her voice urgent. "He's dying." "We can't risk it," Caleb said, scanning the ridges for ambush. Yet something in Eliza's eyes gave him pause. The same fire that had pulled him from the river, the same unyielding compassion. Against his instinct, he lowered his weapon. Together they dragged the man to shelter, dressing his wound with strips torn from Eliza's dress. At dawn, the warrior stirred, his eyes sharp despite his weakness. He spoke little, but gratitude gleamed in his gaze. Days passed, and his strength returned. Though words between them were few, trust began to grow. He taught them to track elk, to find roots beneath the frozen earth, to read the sky for signs of weather. He did not ask for their past, nor did he share his own. Yet his presence became a lifeline in the unforgiving wild. But peace was short-lived. One morning, as frost still clung to the grass, the distant crack of a rifle split the air. Bandits, the same who had marked them in Red Rock, were on their trail. Caleb's stomach sank as he realized they'd been hunted all along. The attack came swift. Bullets hissed through the pines, splintering bark. Caleb fired back, his shots measured, his stance steady despite the rush of blood in his ears. Eliza ducked behind a fallen log, clutching the spare rifle Caleb had thrust into her hands. Her fingers shook, but when a bandit broke cover, she steadied her aim and pulled the trigger. The man fell, his cries silenced by the crack of her shot. Shock washed her face, but resolve followed swiftly after. Caleb took a bullet grazing his shoulder, hot blood searing his shirt. He stumbled, teeth clenched against the pain. Eliza was there instantly, dragging him back, her voice fierce with urgency. "Stay with me." The warrior fought beside them, his bowstring snapping, arrows flying swift and sure. The bandits faltered, retreating into the shadows, but the damage was done. Caleb collapsed, his breath ragged, blood soaking the ground. Eliza pressed her hands to his wound, refusing to let despair claim her. Night fell heavy as they huddled by the fire. Caleb lay pale, his strength waning, but his eyes never left hers. Eliza's voice trembled as she whispered, "They'll never stop hunting us. Maybe the world means to break us." Caleb's hand reached for hers, weak but unrelenting. The world said no. He rasped, his lips curved in a faint, defiant smile. "But I'll keep saying forever." Tears traced down her face, mingling with soot and ash. She leaned close, her forehead against his. "Forever," she echoed, her vow carved into the darkness. The warrior kept watch at the edge of camp, silent sentinel against the night. Beyond the firelight, the wilderness stretched vast and merciless, filled with unseen dangers. Yet within that fragile circle of warmth, their love stood unbroken, their defiance a flame that refused to die. The world had thrown its fury at them, river, storm, hunger, bullet, and still they endured, bound not by circumstance, but by choice, by a vow whispered against death's shadow, they pressed onward. The fire crackled, casting their faces in shifting light, as if the frontier itself bore witness to their resolve. And though dawn would bring new trials, the night closed with the certainty of a truth they both carried in their hearts. No matter how cruel the world's judgment, their love had chosen forever. The chapel stood at the edge of a valley, weather-beaten and hollow, its steeple leaning like a tired sentinel against the sky. Once it had rung with hymns, but now its windows were shattered, its pews splintered, its altar stained by dust and time. Caleb leaned against Eliza as they approached, his shirt dark with dried blood, every step a battle against weakness. The warrior walked a pace ahead, silent as always, eyes scanning the ridges for the men who hunted them. The air carried a weight, a hush that felt less like peace and more like waiting for the storm for the final reckoning. Inside, the chapel smelled of mildew and old wood. Eliza lowered Caleb onto a bench, her hands trembling as she checked his wound. He waved her off with a faint smile, though his face was pale as parchment. "Don't fuss, love," he whispered. "I'm still breathing, ain't I?" She gripped his hand tightly. "You'll keep breathing. I won't let you stop." Before he could answer, the warrior raised his hand, signaling silence. Hoofbeats thundered faint in the distance, drawing closer with every heartbeat. Caleb forced himself upright, his jaw hardening despite his weakness. He had known this moment would come. The bandits were relentless. Their pride demanded blood for every man lost. And in their eyes, Caleb and Eliza were prey cornered at last. The first rifle shot cracked through the still air, shattering the chapel silence. A bullet slammed into the wall, splinters flying. Eliza pulled Caleb to cover, her breath sharp with fear. The warrior knocked an arrow, his movements swift, calm, as though born of battle. Through the broken door frame, shadows shifted, the bandits advancing, their laughter cruel, their boots crunching on the brittle ground. Caleb gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his feet, leaning on the bench for support. His body screamed in protest, but his spirit would not yield. He drew his Colt, the iron steady in his hand despite the tremor in his arm. "This ends here," he murmured, voice low but certain. The attack came like a flood. Bandits surged through the doorway, guns blazing. The chapel roared with violence. Caleb fired, each shot deliberate, his eyes burning with defiance. The warrior loosed arrows with deadly precision, each finding its mark. Eliza crouched beside Caleb, loaded and fired the spare rifle, her aim truer than she dared believe. Smoke thickened the air, choking and acrid, the pews splintering under the hail of lead. A bandit lunged through the haze, his knife gleaming. Eliza swung the rifle, but striking hard. The man staggered, and Caleb finished him with a shot. Another rushed in from the side, but the warrior intercepted, blade flashing as steel met flesh. The clash was brutal, merciless, and the floor ran slick with blood. Caleb's wound burned hot, his vision dimming at the edges. Still he fought, each trigger pull a vow. Beside him, Eliza's face was set with grim determination, her eyes fierce, no longer the woman shunned as an outsider, but one who had carved her place by sheer will. Then the scarred leader appeared, striding through the smoke like a devil risen. His grin was wide, his pistol already aimed. "You should have stayed dead in that river," he spat, his voice dripping venom. Caleb raised his Colt, but his strength faltered. The scarred man fired, the shot grazing Caleb's side and slamming him back against the altar. Eliza screamed, dropping to shield him. Her hands pressed his chest, blood seeping warm between her fingers. The bandit leveled his gun, again aiming straight for her. But the arrow came first. The warrior's bowstring sang, and the shaft struck true, burying deep in the man's throat. He staggered, choking, his weapon slipping from his grasp as he collapsed onto the chapel floor. Silence fell, broken only by Caleb's ragged breathing and the crackle of burning wood. One by one, the surviving bandits fled, their courage crumbling without their leader. The night swallowed them, leaving only the dead behind. The warrior lowered his bow, his face unreadable, then turned and disappeared into the shadows without a word, as if his part in their story had ended. Eliza cradled Caleb's face, her tears streaking through soot. "Stay with me. Please. You can't leave me now." His hand lifted weakly to her cheek, smearing blood across her skin. His eyes met hers, weary but unwavering. Not leaving. Never leaving. Forever, remember? His voice cracked but carried the weight of an oath. She pressed her forehead to his, their breaths mingling, the ruin of the chapel falling away around them. In that moment, they were not fugitives, not victims of a world scorn, but two souls bound unbreakably. She kissed him fiercely, not as farewell, but as defiance. When the dawn crept through the shattered windows, its light fell upon them where they sat together before the altar. There were no witnesses, no priest, no ring. Yet in whispers, they spoke vows truer than any words could carry. "I take you," Caleb rasped, his hand clutching hers, "for all my days, for all that's left." "And I take you," Eliza replied, her voice steady despite the tears. "Through hunger, through fire, through every no the world gives." They sealed it with a kiss, fragile yet unyielding. Outside, the land stretched vast and merciless, but within those crumbling walls, their love stood sovereign. The days ahead would not be easy. They would face hunger again, perhaps more blood, more rejection. The frontier was not kind, and fate cared little for oaths spoken in ruins. Yet they had faced the river, the wilderness, the storm, and the guns of men who sought to tear them apart. Still they endured. Caleb leaned against Eliza as they prepared to leave the chapel, his steps slow, but sure. She supported him, her arm firm around his waist. Their future was uncertain, carved from hardship, but each step they took was together. And together was enough. As they passed through the chapel's broken door, Caleb looked back once, his eyes tracing the altar where they had bound themselves in defiance of the world. His voice was quiet, but Eliza heard every word. When the world said no, he paused, his smile faint but fierce. Love said forever. They walked into the dawn, the sun rising over the valley, casting gold upon the weary earth. Ahead lay danger, but also hope. The story was not finished, it had only begun. And for those who listened, for those who watched, the lesson lingered long after the dust had settled. Perhaps it was this: the frontier was never truly about land or gold or power. It was about hearts tested in fire, about souls that refused to bow, love that endured when all else fell away.